What do you see? Iconic symbol of the Highlands? Photographic opportunity? Food? Conflict? Pest? Well, for the moment, what you think doesn't matter, because a well-meaning group of environmentalists have decided for you. Called the Deer Working Group, the Scottish Government appointed them to advise on the future of deer in Scotland. They have just made a bundle of recommendations to the government about all wild deer and non-wild deer management and its future in Scotland. And most of it pushes for greater state control because, they say, of the C word, climate. Here are a couple of those recommendations to be getting along with. No closed season for any male deer. That's right, open season on stags and bucks. Then there's a reduced closed season on female deer, and a drive to eradicate all fallow and sika deer. And this is all backed up by millions of pounds worth of government contracts to shoot deer. As that sinks in, let's look at a few reasons why the state swapping its regulatory power for hands-on management is a really bad idea. We'll start with fences. 3-sided fences. This one is protecting the precious and 4-sided SSI Soonart oak wood. Deer manager Niall Rowantree follows the fence line from the cattle grid to the loch edge, where it stops at the waterline. Imagine if deer were strong swimmers. Oh.
On one side of this fence is a differing land use objective to that side. From this point where this fence goes into the sea, there's a 7-mile hole open to deer range on the other side of the water. There's none to stop a stag walking down there, popping into the water for 2 feet and popping back up here and going from cherished asset to pest in less than a metre.
Willow.
Further along the road we meet ecologist Dr. Cathy Main. She used to work for Scottish Natural Heritage, and she knows the pressures the department is under. As with so many government agencies, they can't spend as much time in the field as they should. They do what they do by remote control, and that means things slip through the net. This area is currently classified as heavily browsed. What does Cathy think?
Immediately, we've got quite a big understory, there's a thicket of vegetation, it's difficult to walk through. Particularly, we've got lots of brambles. So there's brambles through all of this area here, which are very, very palatable to deer. So the presence of brambles and honeysuckle are two of the kind of key things that tell us that there are not a high population of deer in this area.
So to be blunt, have they got it wrong?
Right here, it's not heavily, there is not heavy browsing by deer. Yeah, bluntly, that's not true. And I don't see the crop damaged heavily either. The crop is doing well. There are occasional bits of damage, but it's not heavy.
Okay, so is the system fit for purpose, Cathy?
I think it's a little bit like trying to do heart surgery with a spoon.
This is why the people on the ground, working the ground, should be trusted to make the management decisions. Because right now, deer are being lamped here to lower the deer browsing pressure, even though the ecologist says there's no issue.
Last year I was coming back up the road here with school kids in the car. Here at the side of the road is government staff shooting deer in spotlights. Now, the guy that's the local manager for the area, I know him very well, he's a competent guy, and he's constricted by his business targets as to how he manages this issue. And I think there's an opportunity here to revisit this model and actually bring these things back to the communities.
The Scottish Government spends around £10 million a year employing contract shooters to kill deer on the public estate. The total cost, including management and infrastructure, is a lot higher. With the current proposals, this cost can only escalate. Surely that money can be better spent on healthcare or policing, with recreational hunters taking on the deer management burden, adding money to the coffers, not removing it.
The model that we seem to be being pushed towards sees deer as a pest, as vermin, to be exterminated rather than allowed to flourish in a kind of very managed way at a cost.
Yep.
And to my mind, it is unintelligent to not make the most out of that resource, and doubly so when the cost goes back to the taxpayer.
Back to the report and a few more of those recommendations. An immediate ban on lead ammunition for deer in Scotland. Reduction of deer to 10 per square kilometre, blanket across Scotland. Plus, you will not be able to shoot any deer at any time or anywhere without a licence from SNH, which you will have to pay for. Another section of the report deals with public safety, specifically road traffic accidents. But instead of trying to stop deer coming onto our carriageways, incredibly, the government is encouraging it. These cows are licking the salts that are mixed in with grit to make it stick to the road. Deer also crave this delicious cocktail. So, an effort to keep drivers safe in winter is encouraging deer into the path of traffic. And it gets worse. On one section of the A85 just north of the Greenwelly stop, the deer fence on both sides of the valley guides deer straight onto the road and the rail track.
You can see this is a deer fence. It's been here a while. There's a bit of moss growing on the posts. I'm a stag inside this fence. I'm on the public estate. I'm coming onto a high-speed carriageway. I'm coming off the corner of the deer path, and suddenly I'm free and I'm back out into the wild again. So with that simple action, I've gone from being a cost to the taxpayer and an impact on the public woodland to back out on the open range. And more importantly, I've done it right in the middle of a high-speed carriageway, where if you look, the grass is mown and they're spraying salt on it. And there's signs in the road here saying, warning wild deer. Perhaps the sign should say, warning incompetent management.
The fences are not just funneling deer onto the roads and rails, they're trapping them.
So what we have, open range. We've got the Bredalbin Deer Management Group, the Blackmount Deer Management Group. We've got deer fences. Deer are coming into the low ground in the winter, funneled onto the main road and through the gaps in the fences. Then in the summer, they come against a fence line and can't return back to their range. Here they're an economic asset, here they're a cost to the taxpayer. And in the middle, in my opinion, is basic incompetent management.
What would it cost to just join the dots?
Probably significant. I mean, I couldn't give you a figure to build a...
Why did they start?
I think the initial idea has got to be to try and keep deer out of restocking woodland. As we look down the way, we can see a restock. So what they're trying to do is maintain deer at a lower density to get a commercial crop away. But to half do the job is to make the wildlife manager's job worse. Because what's happening now is there's a constant stream in and there's no flow back out. I've been along the whole of this new fence line. There's not a single deer jump on it. So the deer cannot get back out. Now in parts of the public estate, they're telling you now that they're doing deer management using contractors. The contractors are paid on a headage basis. They need bodies on the ground. So it removes a selective element and it removes a continuous disturbance element of controlling deer on restocks. These guys, out of no harm of their own, will go after the numbers rather than the protection element. And the guys on the ground, the wildlife rangers, are becoming fewer in number and the resource is becoming thinner and thinner on the ground.
So the contractors are going for the low-hanging fruit. Why on earth would they bother scaring and doing all the other things to put them off when they don't get paid to do that? They just get paid to provide to put meat in the chiller.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a whole background to this. So they're doing population assessments in the woodlands, and then they're creating population models from their assessments in the woodlands of what they think is an enclosed population. But there's a whole element of ebb and flow here that they're not taking into account. And what it is doing outside the fence is people that have a commercial interest, that create local employment, that create hunting tourism opportunities, that bring spend to the local community, are being slowly hemorrhaged by events like this one next year. Marks of deer grazing, split stem,
We decide to take a look at the state of the young plantation along the A85. It's in poor condition.
The tragedy in all this is we've got a nation calling for more trees, We've got politicians talking about planting literally millions of trees. We're all questioning where these actual trees will come from, because we already know that this year the Forestry Commission are millions of trees short of their target. And then we're wondering that we have, you could say, high-level visions, but we're not actually capable at the moment of delivering on the ground. And we failed, I think. I mean, when I worked in this area, the Forestry Commission squad went to work in a minibus. Now they can go to work in a pickup truck. So there's been a general, again, disconnect from the local community. It's not creating employment. It's not delivering what it can on the ground commercially. And we're looking for wider, cheaper solutions when we should actually be focusing on things that bring a benefit to the local community and to the environment.
Our final example of where big ideas on grand scales lead to big mistakes takes us into a plantation near Fort William. We've been told about piles of abandoned deer fencing material worth thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money. It's been here for about 3 years and it's rotting.
So I've done a quick calculation on the phone here using current prices for that netting on eBay. That netting alone lying on the ground is £9,576 worth. That's before we look at deer posts, gates and strainers. Now, we were last on this site. There were deer gates just lying on top of this and they've disappeared. But we don't know, have they disappeared because they're being used somewhere on the public estate, or have they disappeared because they've gone somewhere else? But to my mind, just to reiterate it, I think this is unacceptable. That's taxpayers' money that's not being used wisely.
Even if the government's intention is to exchange deer fencing for deer shooting, this lack of competence and inability to manage the glaringly obvious leaves many of the remaining staff at Forestry and Land Scotland demoralised and disillusioned.
We as practical land managers, working with private individuals who have invested in their land, should be able to expect on the public estate that it's the same level playing field, that they're taking the same responsibility and they're careful about their costs and maximising their benefits. And draw your own conclusions.
What a waste. And it's not as if the fence that is in place is doing its job. Here are some shots of the holes. What's weird about all of this situation is there is no talk about the hulking great elephants in the room, the ones that are covered in wool and the ones that go moo. Why is no one pointing out the environmental and economic impact of millions of sheep and cattle, or the invasive regen suppressing swathes of rhododendron? It's all about deer. Then there's the mountain hare. Mountain hares carry ticks and can be a vector for Lyme disease. In the report it says that if Lyme is detected in an area, deer should now be shot to prevent the spread. Mountain hares are getting more protection. Why? Well, talk to people in Scotland's Central Belt and you will find a distaste for trophy hunting. You will note a passion for land reform, and there is a climate emergency that may or may not be solved by planting hundreds of millions of trees with no fire breaks. All of this makes it increasingly likely that land uses that have gone on for centuries will be swept away by a well-meaning urban population who refuse to see any value in them. Once they're gone, it's unlikely we will ever restore what we may lose. If you are watching this and you are from the Scottish Government, at least try a pilot scheme to confirm the gains you hope to get before you start forcing the losses. And remember, if you think you have a deer problem now, you wait until there's 10 million acres of new woodland for them to hide in.